In this video we are going to explore how to better manage your waste material using Auto CutOff and web cutting within ZebraCut. So I have here a small job which requires framing. You can see it consists of multiple parts and there's quite a lot of space in between our parts. This wasted space will be material which will need to be disposed of, but you can see it's quite a large piece which would need to be perhaps cut up in order to be disposed of. Now ZebraCut is able to help with that, and let's have a look and explore how that can be done. So first let's just run a preview and see how this job would be framed. You can see there's multiple frames and many parts are being cut across different frames because they're longer than the size of my machine, which is here in orange. To add Auto CutOff, we're going to go to the job configuration system, and we are going to choose Auto CutOff from the list of configurations and add it to our job configuration. Now immediately we've been warned by ZebraCut that we have a job configuration for Auto CutOff which is not being read by any CAN pipeline stage. Let us address this. We're going to go to Advanced, we're going to edit our CAN pipeline, and we're going to add a stage into the pipeline which automatically calculates and computes Auto CutOff, where to place Auto CutOff lines. So we're just going to add this in, and you'll see there is now an Auto CutOff step. I'm then going to save this when prompted, and that'll now be part of our pipeline. So that's a one-off step. So I can now close this message because we've addressed what it's suggesting we do. So we now have our Auto CutOff step, and it has many options which we'll work through. The very basic ones, we want to make sure we enable Auto CutOff, and we're going to choose the cut mode. So just to start with, we're going to just cut at the job end. So this might be in order to get a clean edge to your roll of material. So we're just going to cut off at the end, and let us then preview this job. And you'll see we've now got a new layer appeared, Auto CutOff, and we've got to choose a tool with which to do our cutting. That could be a laser, it could be a router, it could be a knife. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to use a pen. So we'll assign that, and we'll now see we have an Auto CutOff layer, and you'll see we now have an Auto CutOff right at the very end of our job. So this is the final cut, which would leave us with a nice clean edge on our roll of material. So let us look how we can configure that. So let's go back to job config and to Auto CutOff, and we can control a few things about this Auto CutOff line. So for example, we can control whether we want to have a bit of clearance from our last part to where we place the Auto CutOff line. At the moment it's 10 millimeters. Let's say we want to leave 100 millimeters. And again we can preview that, and you'll see our line has been recalculated automatically, and it's now 100 mil beyond the last part of our job. You'll notice that the cut is occurring in two directions, so it's in two passes from the center outwards. This is done to avoid rucking the material, but clearly if you wish you can cut it in one single motion, which would be faster. So we'll turn off center cut outwards, and this time as you'll see we've got one single cut going across the machine bed. Now we also have a feature for web cutting, so let us turn on the cut mode for web cutting, and we see we'll use this X spacing, and what will happen is we'll try and put a cut-off line every 500 millimeters in order to make our waste more manageable. So let us run this, and you'll see we now have various Auto CutOff lines for web cutting, which is going to break up our material. And you'll see it works nicely around our parts. We don't currently cut within parts to avoid moving the material, but you'll see we do cut at the top and indeed the bottom of all of our parts. And if I move some of the parts around, you'll see that the web cutting lines are generated again to work around your parts. The amount of clearance that we have between our parts and the auto cutoff line can be controlled using the cut offset. So perhaps we want to have a much larger offset to avoid any possibility of marring our parts. And so if we do that, you'll see we have a much larger gap between our auto cutoff lines and our parts. Clearly that makes the web harder to break, but of course there's a trade-off with these things. You can also use that in center outwards mode rather than having everything going vertically there. And let's run that. So you see our lines are now going center outwards on both sides. Finally, one very common application is using auto cutoff with a roll of material. And of course your roll of material may not be the same width as your machine bed, which is how these lines are being calculated. So in order to adjust for that, we're going to enter a minimum and maximum Y, which could reflect where the material is on our machine bed. So let's assume that the roll of material starts at 200 mil into the machine bed and finishes at, let us say, 1500 millimeters. So again, if I run that, you'll see that our auto cutoff lines stop at 1500 and they start at 200. So let's find an example of that. There's one that starts at 200 into the machine bed and they finish at 1500. So again, we can adjust these to suit, so maybe it's only 50 mil, and then we get much longer auto cutoff lines. Again, just as you would normally, you can choose which tool you're using for the auto cutoff layer, so that you can use the right tooling. Perhaps you'd prefer to have a more rapid cut on waste material than you would for cutting your parts. Something else that can help you achieve greater efficiency with your machine. Now, once you are happy with the auto cutoff configuration, I would suggest that you save your job config and then you set it as the default. Of course, there's nothing to stop you from having multiple job configs, and you can of course export different versions and then load them based on the material that you're using or the roll width of the roll, for example. We really do give you lots of flexibility in order to make your production as efficient as possible. So there we go, there's web cutting and auto cutoff at the end of a job. Thank you very much.